So this is part 2 of Everything Great About Get Out. If you haven't watched part 1, it's up in the card and there's a link in the description. I just felt like the conclusion to this movie needed its own video and had less to do with a horror segue to my Stranger Things video on Nebula, so you can watch that if you like. Let's start with this. Jordan Peele. Dude, who saw you coming? The guy from Key and Peele, granted one of the funniest sketch shows ever, writing such a tight script and then directing the heck out of it was not something I expected. It reminds me of when Argo was good. But it's more surprising than Argo because Affleck was still basically in his wheelhouse. Jordan mostly left comedy at the door for this one. To hear Jordan talk about doubting himself, thinking that he could never make it as a director with the talent he has inside him, and then hearing that Whoopi Goldberg winning an Oscar was a huge inspiration for him, and that inspiration made it so that he can now be an inspiration to a whole new generation. Get Out did for the horror thriller what Black Panther did for blockbusters. Differently, obviously, it was a year earlier and it was actually a majority white cast, but the protagonist, the person who carries us through the film, was black, offering a perspective we don't often get. But what a tight shooting script, no wasted time. Ready? Before I tell you, quickly guess in your mind how many minutes of runtime are left when Rose and Chris enter the house for the final act, and then also how many minutes are left after he escapes. 40 minutes and about 11, including credits. But the pacing never feels off. Reading the script shows a lot of cuts that were made and every one of them was the right call. And he managed to interweave everything with double, triple meanings. Time for bingo? Rose rescues Chris / needs to get him away from the auction. Meeting the new boyfriend or showcasing the merchandise. And our two leads are a huge part of why this movie works so well. Rose's switch to Roro makes your skin crawl, especially when we were so enamored with her and Chris's relationship throughout. And Chris plays it so calm and collected right until he realizes he's in grave danger. Chris is the epitome of a guy constantly shoving himself down so as not to upset the apple cart. With the cop, with Rose's dad, with Rose's brother, with every single idiot at the party, with Rose again. It's an honest take on how black people are often forced to conduct themselves to avoid confrontation. Even if this example is probably applicable to lots of people, the instances don't often pile up like they do on top of Chris. But the point is that what Chris does voluntarily as self-preservation is taken to the next level by the sunken place. A literal visualization of marginalization. Jordan used it primarily as a spotlight for black people in horror movies who are rarely the main characters and often die early as a matter of law. But it's super easy to extrapolate out for myriad things. Chris is silent in the sunken place. No matter how hard he fights, it's like struggling against the vacuum of space. The deer. I joked about the deer jump scares, but there's a lot more. So they hit a deer, Chris watches it die cold and alone on the side of the road as self-imposed penance for not being there for his mom. Dean hates deer, and he does so with language that could be easily substituted for race. Buck is also a slur used to describe black men, which is why disembodied deer are all around the Armitage house, including the one watching Chris, which is technically in a place of honor, like a trophy, removed of all life, just looking pretty. And then Chris kills him with it, the animal that has been represented as a symbol for us relating to his inaction during his mother's death. Again, like with the cotton, turning the tool / symbol of the oppressor back on them. Okay, before I get too much back into the racial stuff, here's a disclaimer that will get me tons of backlash, which is ironic because disclaimers are meant to abate backlash. But the people who will probably give me backlash for this disclaimer aren't the people I'm doing the disclaimer for. Get it? I, a non-black person, more specifically a white man, am unqualified to truly understand the emotional impact and subtle statements about systemic racism represented in Get Out. I can look at it academically, as empathetically as humanly possible, but with only a sliver of second and third-hand information from friends and no true first-hand experience. But just like other movies I've done concerning cultures and races not my own, like Moana and Coco and even Black Panther, I'm gonna do my best. I will make mistakes, and there will be gaps in my knowledge as well as my research because there always are. A lot of the allegory isn't too tough to discern, but my goal is to look at some aspects that not all of us caught or understood and celebrate the absolute genius of Jordan Peele in the process. Disclaimed? Disclaimed. And if this makes you roll your eyes because you think I'm virtue signaling, fine, that's fine. I think saying all this is important because number one, it's true, I believe it, and number two, if someone sat in my chair and tried to talk to me about a specific piece of art that spoke to a specific piece of me or a trauma of mine, I'd appreciate the acknowledgement. I've said a million times that I think most anyone can talk about most anything. It doesn't mean everyone is going to have the most applicable life experience to understand everything. The irony of the fact that if Jordan Peele existed in his own universe, Dean would have told Chris he loved Get Out and Us, saw them both in theaters 8 times, and really got it while tapping his fist on his chest and mouthing respect, isn't lost on me. He maybe even would have showed him a YouTube video made by a white guy about this movie. So yeah. I also feel the need to point out that this isn't political for me at all. As far as I'm concerned, even if they're trying, all politicians fail minorities, which is why education and exposure to these topics matter. One last thing to get out of the way, this movie is satire, and it's not racist, nor does it say all white people are evil. White people aren't even the villains. The Armitages are, but if you're paying attention, you realize the real villain here is the system. But there's no way a bunch of waspy sexagenarians could start swapping out old white people for young black people without anyone noticing. Still, the concept that we do turn a blind eye to this type of evident in-your-face exploitation and marginalization, and that some people even deny its existence, isn't lost on me. On to the movie. It actually didn't dawn on me at first how poignant the I have black friends comparison is. How can we be racist? We welcome black people into our family, even go so far as to replace our white friends with them. Well, just their appearance. It's almost as if racism has more to do with than just skin color. But for the Armitages, it's all about the physical. Their grandma loves the look of her skin, grandpa loves to be fast, Tiger's the best, Logan loves his new wife. And this is the reason that Jordan chose wealthy, upper-class liberals rather than, like, Deliverance caliber pitchfork murderers or even casual but obvious racists. It's because the sheen of allyship can fall apart on a whim, uncovering centuries of systemic racism. The
voted for Obama for a third term.
Or the
black dude comes along, proves him wrong in front of the entire world.
Or the I made a YouTube video about a movie that's about racism style of allyship. It's ultimately lip service and does little to change things. Doesn't mean we stop trying. One of my favorite things about Get Out is the spotlight on this, like, I don't know, light racism? Uh-oh, I did a tiny racism.
Voted for Obama for a third.
With your frame and your genetic makeup.
Black is in fashion.
Okay, that last one is less than light, but it's these compliments that are just backhanded racism, deliberate or not, which is why this...
They are not racist.
...is what this movie was about for me. And I'm not saying everyone is secretly or unknowingly racist, nor is this movie. I'm saying racism isn't just using the N-word. Clearly the film is an allegory. That line...
Because he's a lame dad more than anything else.
...is a bald-faced lie in the context of the movie, but it also serves to point out something to us that Chris already knows. Racism isn't just your parents threatening to disown you if you bring home a black date. It's things a lot of us, including me, are guilty of and may not even have realized could be totally demeaning and offensive. I think that point is important because when someone says that's racist, they're not necessarily calling you a racist even if it feels that way. As humans, we have a tendency to contextualize things self-centeredly, but so often that's missing the point. And this isn't exclusive to black people or even race. "I'm so jealous of you, you can eat whatever you want," she said to the thin girl who has trouble keeping weight on. "You're so lucky you don't have to shave every day," he said to the man who desperately wished he could grow a beard. "Your skin is so exotic, where are you from originally?" they said to the vaguely Asian-looking child. A lot of these things are generally defined as microaggressions. I just call it crappy stuff we all need to stop doing. If you lack a filter, learn one. I still say dumb things. There is a chance I'll say something in this video that's racist or sexist or classist. My goal is to always be learning. And I know, some of these things aren't intended as insults at all, but if it offends or makes the receiver uncomfortable, it doesn't matter what the intention was, it matters what the outcome is. I know, tall words from the guy who loves to praise filmmakers for their intentions. This is different. No one wants to be defined by one thing, whether it's being skinny, smooth, tall, gay, black. When we reduce people to one or a few characteristics they hear all the time, we remove their humanity. Ignorance is the tidiest, cleanest, little wrap-it-in-a-bow way to describe treating someone differently simply because of something they can't change about themselves. This movie does a great job of illustrating why people get upset over things that seem inconsequential or banal to us. It's never just that one thing, this one time.
Do know Tiger. Black is in.
My man.
Is it better? Genetic makeup.
You're gonna love this. Obama for a third.
It's everything. It's death by 1,000 cuts, which is why that one ignorant jokey joke matters, and why we need to correct it. Racism is complex, and once you think you figured it out, you're probably 10 words away from a racism. You might walk away from these videos thinking that I believe everything boils down to racism because that was the focus of this movie. I don't believe that. Some people are just jerks regardless of skin color, some things are just coincidence, some just ignorance. But that doesn't mean we should ignore the result of all that. Systemic racism affects people to this day. Last time I brought up race in a video, there was a plethora of people pointing out that black Africans sold other black Africans into slavery, and their point was, I think, stop shaming me or white Europeans, which I never did and wasn't my point then, and it's not my point now. But start with this. No, you, a white, even descendant of slave owners, sitting there watching this video, you are not responsible for slavery. And you're not evil because you're white. Just like if my father kills your father, I won't be tried for murder, and I'm not evil for being related to him. But does that change how you'd feel about it? And to draw this metaphor out, my father kills your father and then steals his business, which I now own? It's a bad analogy, but it's the dumbest way I can try to simplify systemic foundational racism that 100% exists and is impossible to deny. There are things in our country that are the way they are because of it. You can fill in the blanks on which ones you're willing to believe. Editor's note, they're all real. But how about starting with, slaves built the White House? A black president getting voted into it didn't change that. So my father didn't technically steal your dad's business after killing him. He imprisoned your dad, forced him to build a symbol that you are required by law to now give money to. In fact, you'll see a lot of things that your dad made that he never even came close to reaping the benefits of, and the possibility of you ever doing so is pretty much impossible at this point because we just pretend like enough time has passed, and how are we supposed to compensate you anyway? This isn't about victimhood. This is about an insane, dirty stain on America, as well as the rest of the world, that no one even really knows how to begin to fix. But until very recently, we were barely trying. And that's just base level. By reducing the analogy to one generation, I'm leaving out the decades of benefits reaped from the descendants of the murderer and decades of benefits kept from the descendants of the murdered, which is again a real quantifiable data set that you can look up right now. I mean it, if you're on the fence, it's worth a quick Google. Our starting lines aren't all in the same place. I know. If you're still with me, you probably feel like I've gone off the rails here a bit, but part of me is responding to comments from part 1, and part of me hopes there's one person who just had no clue any of this was real. You probably feel like I repeated myself a lot in this conclusion. I definitely used a lot of the same clips over and over. That was deliberate. I can't hear it enough. I didn't walk away from this movie feeling guilty. I felt empowered, realizing that I'm no
Different than that cop.
Crap, man, that I'm Rose, if not for the knowledge that I could be Rose, makes me feel, I don't know, more prepared to enter the world tomorrow. I'm still gonna mess up. There's a part of me that thinks this entire video is a mistake and some kind of gross racial clickbait. You probably noticed I danced around words like woke, not so much because I know a portion of my audience will just check out after hearing certain words, but because I don't know that I'm woke enough to use it. And just like I started with, there are people way more qualified than me, so here's some of them. All these links are in the description. GoodBlackNews.org is a site that was started because the creator noticed a strange bias in the media where positive things being reported about black people would have an angry or sullen photo attached, or the subject's race was mentioned without their name, even spinning achievements to be passive rather than active. Read, stay with me here, read White Privilege Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. I know that's another buzzword that sends people through the roof. Read her essay, realize that most of your initial gut reactions and the responses to the concept are incorrect and have been shaped by people lying to you about what it actually is. It's less important that the privileged have a leg up than it is that the disadvantaged have a leg down, if that makes sense. It's not about bringing anyone down, it's about bringing everyone up. This is a quick article by Dr. Kamara Phyllis Jones, MPH, PhD. She's like a double doctor, like I don't even know, triple doctor. Anyway, it presents a theoretical framework for understanding different levels of racism and offers a much better analogy than my dad killing your dad. I honestly cut that out almost a dozen times, but I suck at killing even my ugliest of darlings. And then Allison Chino has a whole massive list of resources from movies, podcasts, articles, books, both children's and adults. There's clearly a lot more, and if anyone else has useful resources, I'd love to have them, and I'll even add them to the list in the description. The comment section was primarily positive. There were some rough takes. If you're the type of person to bring up faked hate crimes in response to Get Out, have you asked yourself why? You have to know deep down that for every faked one, there are thousands of real ones. That's not an exaggeration. FBI statistics for 2017, of over 7,000 reported, 60% were race and half of those were anti-black. If you hate Anchorman math, that's over 2,000 hate crimes labeled single bias anti-black. Deep down, I think you know that, and I don't want to believe that the reason is just, oh, they're racist, even though it is sometimes. The only black people care about race comments, or no one really cares about representation, only good characters, aren't any different. It's like saying only wood cares about house fires. Yeah, that's the problem. I've said this a million times before, but it's easy to ignore things that don't affect you. I doubt any of you self-identify as racist and probably aren't classic racists, whatever that means. I get that no one likes being preached at and told you're wrong about something. If you're just tired of hearing about it, imagine how tired people are of living it. The two takeaways for me from this movie are that racism includes more than you realize, and racism didn't end in 1865, 1965, or 2008. The number of racism is over comments on part 1 is precisely why movies like this need to exist. I'm disheartened by some of those comments. Sad that other videos were recommended to me as gotcha responses to my video as honest reviews that are just barely veiled racism pretending to be commentary on the narrative of the film. But that's part of not being black. I don't see it day in and day out, or maybe I don't notice it because I don't have to, because it doesn't affect me. After all, I'm not kidnapping black people and removing their brains. If the system is already in place, who am I to try to change it? F that.
I can barely remember anything, but now the thought of a cigarette makes me want to throw up.